To understand why Formula One is at war with itself on the streets of Melbourne this weekend in March 2026, you have to go back further than most people realize. The seeds of this crisis were not planted in Australia. They were planted in the boardrooms of the FIA more than 5 years ago, when the governing body made an audacious gamble, the most sweeping regulatory overhaul in the sport's modern history. The 2022 ground effect era was supposed to be the great equalizer. After years of aerodynamic tyranny dominated by one team and one driver, the FIA introduced new cars designed to race closer, follow cleaner, and entertain more. And for a brief, dazzling moment at the start of that season, it looked like it had worked. Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc diced wheel-to-wheel across Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. Fans who had grown up watching the sport in the 1980s and 1990s, fans who remembered the raw gladiatorial battles of Senna and Prost, sat up in their armchairs and dared to believe again. Then the teams began to optimize. The gaps returned, the racing dulled, and the FIA went back to the drawing board. What came next was 4 years in the making. By the time the 2026 regulations were formally locked in, the ambition was staggering. New power units, new aerodynamic philosophy. Active aerodynamics, movable front and rear wings reintroduced for the first time in over a decade, now rebranded as straight mode. And most radically of all, a hybrid power unit so electric forward that the battery was now expected to produce nearly 50% of a car's total power output. The MGU-H, that brilliant heat energy recovery unit that had powered the turbo-hybrid era since 2014, was gone. What replaced it was a system theoretically capable of blistering top speeds, but practically, as teams discovered almost immediately, impossible to manage consistently at racing speeds. The energy would charge to its peak, then within half a straight drop off a cliff. Cars slowed despite drivers holding full throttle. The phenomenon had a name. Engineers called it super clipping. And by the time the paddock arrived at Albert Park, it had already become the defining scandal of the young season. Some fans watching qualifying on Saturday, March 7th, 2026, took to social media, expressing widespread disbelief and frustration. One fan wrote bluntly, "The FIA, the 2026 power unit rules are a total disgrace to Formula One. Super clipping caps straight-line speed, forced harvesting destroys momentum, early downshifts, and endless lifting reduce drivers to battery babysitters." That message was not an isolated voice. It echoed a generation of fans who had watched this sport for 40 years and recognized something deeply wrong. What was remarkable about the media pen on Saturday afternoon was how drivers were clearly itching to vent. Lando Norris, the reigning world champion who had won his title in the previous generation of ground effect cars, was asked directly by reporters whether there was anything at all he enjoyed about the new machinery. The Brit looked to the floor ponderously for 7 full seconds, then looked up and said simply, "No, not really." When that same quote was relayed to Lewis Hamilton, now in red at Ferrari, the 7-time world champion laughed and said, "Well, he did." Even Charles Leclerc, usually diplomatic in front of cameras, offered a simple and damning summary. "I've known more fun." Then came the ruling that ignited genuine fury inside the paddock. On Saturday morning, March 8th, FIA single-seater director Nicolas Toumbazis called a news conference to announce that one of the 5 zones where straight mode could be activated at Albert Park would be removed, citing safety concerns after drivers flagged lack of downforce through the curved section between Turn 8 and Turn 9. The FIA was responding, on the eve of qualifying, to concerns raised during Friday's drivers' briefing. They were trying to do the right thing, but the timing was catastrophic. Teams were outraged. These cars require setups on an absolute knife edge. and a change made on the eve of the final practice session risked teams having to start again from scratch in terms of how their aerodynamic packages were configured. Hours of data, correlation runs, setup work potentially rendered meaningless overnight. And then, barely an hour later, came the twist that left the paddock speechless. The decision was reversed after feedback from teams and drivers, and additional analysis contributed by teams themselves. The decision-making process baffled many, including those asking why the teams and drivers weren't consulted to that level before the original decision was made. Make the call. Reverse the call. Within 60 minutes. On race weekend. In front of the entire world. Meanwhile, a deeper, longer burning controversy was already boiling beneath the surface. During the pre-season, reports spread that Mercedes had found a way for their compression ratio to sit at the permitted 16:1 when the car was stationary, but then increase toward the previously allowed 18:1 when moving with the regulations, only stipulating measurement would occur when the car was stationary and at ambient temperature. Verstappen, frustrated and outspoken, claimed this loophole handed his rivals an extra 20 to 30 brake horsepower and 0.3 of a second per lap. For a sport decided by hundredths, that is not a nuance. That is a chasm. The FIA confirmed a mid-season rule change. From June 1st, 2026, the compression ratio will be controlled in both hot and cold conditions. But by then, Mercedes may have already banked enough championship points to make the correction largely academic. Verstappen, speaking after the race, left no room for interpretation. "I love racing, but you can only take so much. I just hope that there is some action, because it's not that I'm the only one saying it. A lot of people are speaking the same. Lewis Hamilton, Ferrari, Max Verstappen, Red Bull Racing. If it's drivers, fans, we just want the best for the sport. We are critical for a reason. He had, after all, crashed out in Q1 at Albert Park, a 4-time world champion eliminated before a single flying lap had mattered. And yet, when the lights went out on Sunday, March 8th, something unexpected happened. Formula One's 2026 era kicked off in action-packed fashion. 7 lead changes in 10 laps. A proper Mercedes versus Ferrari battle in the opening stint. George Russell won calm, precise, dominant with Kimi Antonelli alongside him for a Mercedes 1-2. The new regulations, for all their controversy, had delivered something chaotic and compelling in the opening laps. Whether that lasts, whether teams optimize these cars into the same processional predictability that ended the ground effect era is the defining question of the next 12 months. What Melbourne in March 2026 has shown us is that Formula One is navigating one of the most turbulent regulatory transitions in its history. Rules reversed within the hour, engine loopholes discovered midwinter, champions who cannot enjoy driving their own cars, and a governing body learning in public, under the harshest spotlight in sport that the most ambitious regulation cycle ever attempted, may require more humility than ambition to survive. The sport you fell in love with is changing again. Whether it changes for the better is something only time and the next 23 races will answer.